In today's video, I'll be sharing some super quick, easy, and downright adorable DIYs using Dollar Tree's Tumbling Tower Blocks. So let's get started. Dollar Tree's Tumbling Tower Blocks are hands down one of my favorite crafting supplies. I love crafting with these. For this DIY, I'll be using a box of these wooden tumbling tower blocks. One box comes with 72 blocks, and for this project, I'll be using 36 blocks. I'll be staining the blocks with this Americana gel stain from Deco Art in the shade Walnut. So I just apply that on the blocks, and I'm using a cloth here, but you can also use a brush. Now immediately after I apply the color, I wipe it down, removing the excess stain. Now for these blocks, I'm applying the stain on one wide side. This is the only surface that's going to be seen. Also, I'll be applying glue all over the sides, so I want to make sure I don't get glue on those areas and just keep it bare. Now because I'll be using wood glue, I always prefer to stain the wood first. Glue tends to seep out between the joints, and once that dries, it's really difficult for the wood to absorb the stain. I'll be using two of these thick wood blocks from Dollar Tree. Now one is going to be the top and the other the base of the riser. And I'm going to stain them as well, but before I do that, I do sand the ends first, or the end grain as you can see here. Otherwise, it's going to soak up a lot of stain. So sanding or sealing really helps to close the wood pores a bit. Now on the wood blocks, I'm only going to apply the stain on one surface side and the edges. The surface on the opposite side isn't going to be seen. It's going to be covered up, which you'll see later, so I leave that side unstained. For the other block, it's going to be the base, so you can stain it the same way or just the sides. I realized I wanted a little contrast with the blocks. Looking back, I kind of wish I painted it a different color, so I decided to add another layer of the stain to deepen the color. I'm going to be gluing the blocks together, but before I do that, I turn them all over so that when I glue them together, the blocks will look nice and flush when I turn it over. I'm gluing the blocks together side by side, and I'm using wood glue from Dollar Tree. So I'm just going to continue to glue the blocks together until I have 11, and I make 2 sets. After that, I glue 7 blocks together side by side, and I make 2 sets. Once it's completely dried, I turn them all over, and then I'm going to glue all 4 together to form a rectangle. So I place some wood glue on the sides of the 7, and I place those in between the ends of the longer side like so. And I just make sure that the corners are at a 90-degree angle. Now I did clamp it with some painter's tape on the sides while it dried. And once that's completely dried, I'm going to touch up the unstained area. The tumbling block rectangle is going to be placed in between the wood boards, and the blocks are slightly smaller than the boards, so I'll be applying a little bit of stain on the outer edge of the wood board. I make sure not to take it too far in, so I'm still gluing bare wood to bare wood. And then I touch up the blocks that didn't get stained. Finally, I apply some glue on the ends of the blocks, and I flip it over and I place that on top of a wood board, and I just make sure that it's centered. And then I do the same thing and apply some glue on top of the blocks, and then I place the wood board right on top. The riser is all done. It turned out so beautiful. It feels very sturdy and solid. You can place whatever you want on top, like plants or candles. It's perfect. Okay, for this project, I'll be making a lantern, and I'll be using 36 blocks. I'll be staining with acrylic paint, apple barrels, territorial beige, and khaki, thinned out with a little bit of water. So I brush that on and then immediately wipe it down with a clean cloth before it dries to remove the excess paint. Now I do apply the paint all over the surface and the sides, except for the ends because that's where I'll be applying glue. So first, I'm going to be forming a square with 4 of the blocks. So I just apply a little wood glue on the ends and I form a square. This carpenter square from Dollar Tree really helps. I always love using this, especially when I'm working with these blocks. Now I make 2 sets of the square, and then I'm going to take 4 more blocks and glue them right on the unpainted ends, and I add that on both of the squares. So these 2 are going to make the top and the base of the lantern. Next, I'm gluing 5 blocks together end to end. Now I know I'm kind of speeding through this, but after I glue them together, I do hold them together for a few minutes to give the wood time to bond. But with that said, this glue does dry really fast compared to some of my other favorite wood glues, and I love the little nozzle on this one, especially when you're working with these little blocks. To assemble, I'm going to be gluing the blocks of 5 vertically on those unpainted ends. So I put some glue on an end, and then I take the glue blocks and holding it vertically, I attach the end of that one on the end with glue. So it makes a 90-degree angle, and then I take a little square dowel and I use that to push the two together. It also helps make sure that it's standing at a 90-degree angle, otherwise you're going to have a crooked looking lantern. And I do the same thing on all 4 sides. By the way, if you guys are enjoying these budget Dollar Tree DIYs, don't forget to give a thumbs up, hit subscribe, and ring that bell so that you don't miss out on any future thrifty creations. Okay, I give the blocks a little time to bond, and then I flip it over, and then on that square piece, which is going to be the base, I apply some glue on those unstained ends. And then I very carefully match up the 2 pieces together so that now I have a top and a bottom. You can place some candles inside or a little faux plant. That Dollar Tree glass plate candle holder also fits nicely inside. It's so simple and stunning. For the next DIY, I'll be crafting a rustic wooden tray with a very weathered chippy paint finish. So to start, I'll be using 36 Tumbling Tower blocks. Now I will be gluing them in this pattern with blocks of 3s alternating positions, but before I paint and glue, I'm just weeding out the blocks that are either too short or thin, just so that they fit nicely together. I'll be using this Americana Walnut Gel Stain from Deco Art. And I'm brushing the stain on with a little paintbrush, and then I wipe it down immediately. I decided to keep them in the groups of 3s from earlier since they already fit together nicely. Now I'm only painting the top surface since I'll be applying glue on the bottom and the sides. Before gluing together, I make sure that the stain dries completely, and then I flip over the groups of 3, keeping them in the same position, just facing downward. That way when I flip the glued blocks over, it will look nice and smooth. So I just glue the blocks together. I start by gluing blocks of 3s and then attaching them to another block of 3, making sure to change the position from vertical to horizontal, and I glue 6 blocks together. And after that, I glue another 6 groups of 3 together, following the same pattern. To attach, I apply some glue on the ends, and then I attach that to the ends of the other set. I use a couple 12-inch 1x2s to squeeze and press the blocks together. Now I will be using 3 12-inch 1x2s for this project, and these are from Dollar Tree. These will make the sides, and I'm going to measure and trimming them down using my miter box. Now for the longer sides, the 1x2s are a little longer than the blocks, but instead of trimming those down, I'll be adding a couple more blocks which will fit nicely, and we'll get to that later. So for the shortest sides, I just mark the amount that I need, and then I trim it down to that length. I'm going to paint the wood, but before I do that, I'm going to be covering up the areas that I'll be applying glue on. I did take note of those areas earlier when I was measuring the wood. I'll be applying several layers of different paint colors and distressing so that you can see those different color layers. And so for the first layer, I just wanted to darken up the wood, so I'll be using Apple Barrel's Territorial Beige thinned out with some water. So just brush that color on, and then I immediately wipe it down with a clean cloth. I'm planning on distressing this heavily, but if that's not your vibe, you can pause here. The final look will be completely different, but I think this rustic color looks quite charming on its own. For the next layer, I'll be applying Deco Art's Seaside Blue, but before I do that, I'm going to be rubbing on some candle wax first. Now the wax creates a barrier keeping the wood from absorbing the paint, which will give it a really nice distressed effect. And I had a bunch of white tea light candles, so I just took one and then I removed that little metal pan underneath. And then I just rubbed that on the wood here and there, a little on the edges as well as the surface, keeping in mind that I will be adding a couple more colors on top. So this is really up to you how much you can rub on, a little or a lot, depending on how much you want to distress. Once I'm done with that, I just clean off some of that extra wax on my surface, and then I apply the next paint color, Seaside Blue. So I apply that with a paintbrush all over, including the area where I rubbed in the wax. Now this paint color is so beautiful. I'm going to add one more color, but I really could have just stopped here, but I didn't. So once that was completely dried, I rubbed on more wax here and there on the edges, on the surface, just in random areas. And then I paint on top of that the light grayish chalk paint color Oyster, and I brush that on all over the wood surface, just like the previous color. I really wanted the top color to be light. I thought that would be a nice contrast with the wood. Now for the fun part. Once everything is completely dried, I peel off all the tape. And then I'm taking a little plastic scraper. This one's from Dollar Tree. You can also use a metal scraper, and then I'm just scraping out the wax. So wherever I rubbed on that wax, you can easily scrape the paint off, depending on how much wax you put. I love how you can see some of the wood underneath. In some areas, you get some of the blues popping out. I like it. So after that, I decided to do the same technique on the blocks and add some blue paint on top of the wood. Totally not planned. I just really wanted to try it out. So I rub the wax all over the surface of the blocks. And then I paint the blue right over that, making sure to get it all over the top surface. Now instead of scraping the wax, I'm going to be removing the paint with some packing tape. So I pull out some tape, and I'll be doing this in sections, and I place it over the blocks, pressing it down firmly. And then I peel out the tape in the direction of the blocks. So I just keep doing that, making sure to use a clean, unused section of the tape, applying it over a group of 3, and peeling it out in that direction. I love how this distressed. Now in addition to these blocks, I did stain and paint on additional 4 more tower blocks to fill in the gaps on the sides. And now it's time to put everything together. So first, I glue the blocks, 2 on each side. I also lay it on its side. And then I apply the glue on the wood right over the area that I previously taped over. And then I just bring it all together. And this DIY is done. For the final DIY, I'll be using this garden-themed rub-on transfer from Dollar Tree and these canvases, and these came in a pack of 3, which is the exact amount that I need. I'm going to be painting the canvases with these Waverly chalk paint. So the first one I'm going to paint in the shade Celery, and I'm using a round sponge brush to paint because it applies the paint evenly and I can avoid applying multiple layers. I make sure to get closer to the edge, but I do leave the outermost area unpainted since I plan to glue a frame on top. Once I get on that first layer, I just pounce the brush over the canvas, and somehow it makes the first layer look even more opaque. For the next canvas, I'm going to paint it in the shade Sandstone. So like the first one, I apply it close to the edge and then pounce the brush to fill in any areas that went on lightly. For the last canvas, I'm going to leave it as is. I'll be making a frame using these Dollar Tree blocks. I'll be using 10 blocks to make a frame, and I just glue the blocks together like so to make a rectangle, with 3 blocks on the longer side and 2 on the shorter. I'm using hot glue since I'm just making a small frame, and it's going to be glued onto a canvas. Now it's time to put it all together. I also added 3 more blocks which will hold up the frames. I'm going to stain the frame with this Deco Art Americana gel stain in the shade Walnut. But before I do that, I lightly sand the joints, and I find that doing this lightly fills in the areas where the gaps are very prominent. I'm not trying to completely cover it, it's not going to do that, but just lightly blend the joints. The sawdust gets in there and sort of very lightly fills in the gaps naturally. So just brush on the stain with a little brush all over the surface, including the inner and outer sides. And once I get that on all over, I wipe it down with a clean cloth to remove the excess stain. You can definitely paint or stain this any color you like, or even keep it natural, which I was also considering. I also make sure to stain those 3 single tumbling blocks. So as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be using this rub-on transfer from Dollar Tree. I'll be using the gardening themed ones, which is perfect for this time of year. There's 3 of them, so I cut those out. For the sandstone canvas, I'll be applying this long one with the gardening tools. So to apply, I remove the white backing paper and I place the rub-on sheet on top of the canvas, centering it. And once it's where I want it to be, I use a little plastic scraper. This one's from Dollar Tree. You can also use a popsicle stick or a spoon, and I just go over the rub-on design several times. And then I slowly peel off the plastic paper, and if there's any areas where the transfer didn't adhere well to the canvas, I just place that plastic sheet back down and I just rub over that area until the whole transfers. For the celery green, I'll be applying the wildflower one, and I place that right in the center and I rub over the image, and you'll start to notice the image slowly separating from the plastic. And that's usually when I'll start peeling it off. And now for the third and final canvas, I'll be applying this Farm Fresh transfer with a border. So I apply that on top of the canvas, rub over the image, and gently peel off the plastic paper. I love that I left this white. Here are the 3 images. They all transferred beautifully, and I love the different colors. To glue the frame, I started off applying glue around the outer edge of the canvas. Now, I was a little concerned about applying too much glue and it seeping in the inner part of the frame, so I'm sure I went a little light with the hot glue, and unfortunately, it didn't hold. I could have tried again, but I thought I would just use another type of glue. So instead of hot glue, I'll be using Titebond multi-surface glue. So just apply that around the outer edge of the canvas, and then I place a wood frame right on top, making sure the image is centered. Then on the back, I just glue a single block vertically towards the bottom end, and this will help the frame stand up. And this DIY is done, and I'm loving how all of these frames turned out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you like these tower block DIYs. I really love how they all turned out, and I hope you do too. Until next time, bye!